Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how you can use an encrypted DNS provider to block malware from potentially getting onto your computer. This was a topic that I covered in last week's video, the Windows Hardening Guide, the 2024 edition. I covered it for like 3 minutes, and I've been getting some questions about it because I think some people kind of wonder how that process actually works. So we'll be diving into that side of things. We're going to keep it mostly related to how it can block malware. We're not going to go really into the deep dive of actually how DNS over HTTPS or DNS over TLS. We're not really going to go into the details of that. I'm just going to do a basic overview. But we'll do a quick explainer on how DNS works for those that might not be familiar, because the thing with DNS, with like encrypted DNS, is first of all, so like it works like I have here, it works from a lot of different perspectives. So you could do it from, so in last week's video, I talked about how you can do it from Windows. So you could do it from the Windows network settings. You could do it from an application like Portmaster or Yoga DNS, or you could use a VPN app, which will have its own DNS settings built into it, or you can do it through the router. You can do it through your phones. Of course, you can do it through Linux and Mac OS, iOS, all that stuff. So there's all these different ways that you can apply encrypted DNS. So this goes beyond just Windows. So this is something I'm going to cover in depth on this one. Now, the thing that people might not realize with DNS is that most of the time, this ends up getting resolved through your ISP. Now, this comes with a couple different problems, and we're going to go over here to this drawing here pretty soon, and it'll make a lot more sense then. Number one, it can lead to potential censorship, because if the ISP, and therefore the government, can see what websites you are visiting, they can also filter and block you from being able to visit websites. And this is a common method. Like, you can block a lot of stuff through DNS. It's not just like for censorship. We'll go like how it blocks like ads, trackers, and malware, all that kind of stuff here pretty soon. But that can be an issue in some countries. It could be an issue in some localities. It can be a privacy issue. We'll cover some of the privacy stuff. And it's also an issue from the data collection perspective, because let's say, pretty much if you're in any Western, well, probably Eastern country too, the intelligence agencies are going to be keeping track of data. Your ISP is keeping track of this. The government in general tracks it, like what websites it is that you visit. And so let's say you go to 50 different websites on a daily basis across an entire year. They will be able to see they go to this website at this time, typically. So there's a lot of data collection that goes on. And if you encrypt your DNS, it takes care of that problem. The other thing with DNS, the other advantage with using DNS is it's by its design, it is not secure. And it's because a lot of it's because it was an old technology. I don't think back when they were working on DNS, they probably didn't foresee that there was going to be nearly as many security problems as there are with it. But this is extremely easy to alleviate. If you wanted to skip the rest of this video, literally you can go to a website like DNS Zero or Quad 9. They tell you how to set it up, and you can just be up and running. This is just going through some of the details of how this stuff works for the people that are interested in it, because a lot of people like to watch that about my videos. So you don't get malware protection from encrypted DNS itself. So that comes from the block lists that the encrypted DNS providers build in. And there's quite a few DNS providers. My 4 favorites that I tend to just recommend to people, if you're fine with making an account and you're aware of what the potential privacy issues are with doing that, NextDNS and Control D are excellent. And if you just want something that's plug and play, then DNS Zero and Quad 9. That's plenty of choice for most people, but of course there's other ones, like there's Cloudflare, Google has their own DNS, but we'll take a look at some benchmarks. Its malware blocking score really leaves a lot to be desired. And of course, there's other providers. You can also get it to like AdGuard. If you use the Molvad VPN, pretty much any VPN is going to do its own DNS, because otherwise, if you didn't encrypt DNS, but you're using a VPN, then your real identity would get leaked that way. So like Molvad, for example, runs their own DNS server. So if you're using the Molvad app on your computer, you're getting encrypted DNS once you turn on the VPN. So let's jump over to the drawing here so I can explain some stuff, and this will start to make a little more sense. So the way to, by the way, I'm not going to go in super depth here. I can make a separate video on DNS in the future. I'm focusing more on the malware blocking side of things, but I'll just give a basic explainer of this. DNS works like the phone books. And so I've got a lot of older people that watch the channel. I'm sure a lot of people probably remember the days where you'd get phone books because you'd think, okay, well, I want to dial up and talk to John Smith, but you can't just type in John Smith onto the phone. You have to dial a phone number. So DNS basically works the same way. It's like a phone book. So really boiling this down and keeping it simple, because I don't want to go too far into the weeds for this video, is you have your PC here and you want to, let's say you want to connect to google.com. Well, you have to go over to this DNS server to get the actual, like the phone number, or in this case, the IP address in order to go to google.com. And it's a lot easier to use this rather than trying to figure out the IP addresses for all these different websites that you want to visit. And some services like Google has multiple, of course, they have multiple IP addresses for all the different services that they provide. So you have to, your DNS server has to send back a response saying, okay, you want to go to google.com? Here's the IP address, 8.8.8.8. Then you can go connect to google.com. So let's explain the encryption side of things. So I've talked a little bit about how you can boost your privacy. I want people to keep this in mind, it's only a small boost to privacy. It'll get you a little bit, but it's really not going to do a whole lot. Here's why. So let's say you are encrypting all of your traffic between you and the DNS provider. There can be no man in the middle going on here. So your ISP can't see what you're doing, the government can't see what you're doing, and a potential attacker cannot see what you're doing. The thing with this is, if you wanted to try to, this is why from a privacy perspective, it just doesn't work all that great. You're still visiting. So if this is a connection here, so this connection here going to google.com, this 8.8.8.8, this can be seen. So the thing is let's say you want to try to hide your activity from, let's say, the government or an ISP. Well, they know that 8.8.8.8 is Google. And they would know that whatever IP addresses that Amazon uses, they know that those go to Amazon. Or these IP addresses go to PayPal. It doesn't necessarily give you much extra privacy, but again, it's just that little extra boost. You do get some security that comes along with this. So like I had already mentioned, you don't have to deal with potential man-in-the-middle attacks because this connection here is running encrypted. If you wanted to secure this as well, what you have to do is use a VPN. If you want to hide the traffic going from your PC to, let's say, google.com, you have to use a VPN. Now, the thing I want to emphasize here, this does not give you anonymity because this is only, again, we're only keeping the surface layer here. There's things like the fingerprinting. There's a ton of fingerprinting that goes on, and it's such a problem to try to deal with that they collect data points like what kind of graphics card are you using, what kind of monitor resolution do you have, what kind of browser are you using, what kind of operating system are you using. So there's a lot of nuance that I could go into here. So for example, if you were going to use the Tor browser, then you can actually, depending on how it's used, so let me say this, if you're going to use something like Tails, then you could actually gain some anonymity. With a VPN, you can gain some privacy, but I just want you to keep this in mind. So you don't get anonymity because the VPN provider will still be able to see what traffic is going through their server. So you do have to trust that you're using, that your VPN provider says that they don't actually have logs. And by the way, Molvad has actually had this tested. They did have a police raid happen. I think it was about 2 years back at this point. And from my understanding, from what was talked about, is the police walked away with nothing. So you could potentially be okay there if you're looking for some extra privacy and anonymity. Of course, you can't ever rely on that because who's to say that an intelligence agency couldn't send some people into the servers overnight and install some backdoors that way. Just saying. Not saying that I'm not saying that would ever happen. I'm just saying in a theoretical world, of course, it could happen. Okay, so let's go back here because there's the next layer of things to talk about. So we've covered the man-in-the-middle attacks, but it only adds a little bit of privacy. So there's this thing called DNSSEC, or DNS security extensions. Now, any DNS provider that's worth their salt already has this built in. It's so easy to build this in. I really don't, I mean, pretty much any DNS provider that's out there should have this built in already. Now, what this does is it makes sure that you are not being sent to a different destination. So in particular, it protects you against spoofing and poisoning. Basically, an attacker could cause the DNS server to send you to a malicious address instead of the real one. So let's say you want to go to PayPal and you have that connection go to the DNS server. DNS server says, okay, here's the IP address that you need to go to. If someone were to spoof that, they could say, okay, well, it's actually going to be this IP address that goes to a malicious website. The problem with DNS, if you don't use DNSSEC, the DNS system by itself without this will not verify that the IP address is actually the one that goes to the website that you're trying to go to. So if you want to go to actually PayPal, if you don't have this turned on, there's no way to verify that that's actually where you're going. So that's what this does. Now, encryption and DNSSEC work hand in hand. Encryption by itself cannot protect against the spoofing and poisoning issues because it will only encrypt the line. So let's say you're getting malicious responses from the DNS server, encryption's not going to help with that. That's where DNSSEC comes into play. And again, any good DNS provider should have this. So let's move off of that because, again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on explaining DNS. Let's get to the malware part. How is it that malware gets blocked? Because that's probably what you're here watching the video for. This comes from threat intelligence providers. Now, pretty much anyone can be a threat intelligence provider. Just about any company that provides IT services, at least any major companies you could consider to be like a threat intelligence provider. So like Microsoft, Cisco, Palo Alto, Red Hat, these are all companies that are examples of threat intelligence providers because they get information on, let's say, someone that's trying to hack into Windows. And they can pass that information off to other companies and say, okay, here's what we've noticed, here are the IP addresses or the domains that are malicious, and then they can add those to block lists. So I put here that this happens on a small to large scale. So here's what I mean by that. Let's take a look at an example. I'll just show you this. So here's an example of the AdGuard filter lists. Now, AdGuard does domain blocking. It's something you can turn on. So if you have uBlock Origin, for example, you can turn on and block a whole bunch of different stuff. They've got their default list, but then you can go and add to them. And you can do things like add the AdGuard lists. And by the way, if you want to see something interesting as far as this goes, it was about a month or two, Leo from the PC Security channel did a video breaking this down where he was testing what can uBlock Origin actually block as far as threats. It had something like a 25% block rate, which I think is pretty damn decent because it's not meant to block malware, it's meant to block ads. And so, of course, I think most people probably despise ads, so I would recommend that if you're not already running with an ad blocker, you might as well go ahead and run one of those. But when I'm talking about running on the small scale, here's what I'm talking about, is where you can find these companies that distribute these lists out. Some of these lists might be kind of small. So there's only, about 1,000 domains inside of this list. Now, in the grand scheme of things, 1,000 domains is like basically zero. But you can look at this and see these are a bunch of bullshit domains that are just used to, so like these are their ad servers. And my guess is there's probably malware that gets distributed from these. And you can look at these and they've got bullshit names. Like this domain here, someone just took their hand and started smashing on the keyboard and they said, oh, okay, well, that's good. Let's go ahead and buy that domain. So it blocks all of these. So let's go back to our drawing here so I can kind of demonstrate for you what this looks like. So when DNS blocks malware, I've talked about this on previous videos, that if you're using a good DNS provider and they have good block lists built in, that it will block malware before it can even potentially get to your computer. One of the issues is that once that malware has a chance to potentially make it to your computer, could potentially get past your antivirus. There's literally massive amounts of videos of people showing computers getting infected that have antivirus. It's definitely not a 100% thing you want to rely on. And DNS isn't for that matter either. But so let's say you want to go to a website and it's actually malicious, but you don't know that. So you send over, so your connection's going over to the DNS server. You want to go to, let's say, randomsite.com, and the DNS checks it and it's trying to resolve it, and it checks, it's got its block lists built in from the provider, and the provider says, oh, okay, well, this is actually on a block list. So it actually blocks it. So it'll come back and it's not going to finish the connection going over to the website because it's part of that block list from their server, meaning that you don't even actually end up finishing and getting the connection made to that website. And so now at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, well, how do these actually stack up against blocking malware? What kind of service can I use? How can I set it up? Let's go ahead and cover that next. So this was an article that I brought up in the last video. I brought it up briefly, just showed it for a few seconds. We'll talk about it just a little bit more on this video. So what these guys did, this is the Next Wave Tech blog. I will drop a link to all this stuff down below so you can go take a look at it for yourself. So what these guys did is they went and tested a bunch of malicious domains, and they tested it with these public DNS resolvers to see how good of a job or how poor of a job they were at blocking malware. And so you'll notice that there was a couple that I talked about. So they do have Control D. One of the ones they don't have on here is Next DNS. So you can get a pretty good idea though. So DNS 0 is actually owned by Next DNS. And so you could basically expect likely similar performance except with Next DNS. If you make an account, you get to go and customize your block lists to however it is that you like. So here's what they did. They said, okay, here's how we performed the test. We wrote a bash script that attempted 10 pings to each DNS resolver, test of 5 known websites, etc., etc. So here's what the results were that they found. So they tested 51,507 malicious hosts, and they showed what the number was that were resolved or not resolved, meaning that if it was resolved, your computer, or in this case their computer, was allowed to go ahead and connect to that website. If it was not resolved, it did not connect to the website. So they have, okay, let's take a look here at these numbers. They've got this graph here, but it makes more sense to just look at these numbers. So Google Public DNS, terrible results. It only blocked 118. Norton, only blocked 138. Ultra DNS, threat protection. It blocked 110. I'm not exactly sure how they call that threat protection when they block only 0.21%, but sure. Cloudflare performs pretty poorly at 6%. And then you've got Komodo Secure DNS at 0.2%. Now, to be fair to these services, the intention of these guys is probably just to encrypt the DNS connection to protect against DNS spoofing, the cache poisoning, and man-in-the-middle attacks. So just, again, to be fair, but if you're going to use these, you might as well just go ahead and use something that actually blocks a lot of potentially malicious domains. So when you look at this, so like clean browsing did really well, 85%, DNS 0 right around 96% basically. These DNS 0, we'll cover this one here pretty soon. This one's slightly different, and we'll talk about that one. Quad 9 is really good. Now, we'll cover the particulars of this. Control D does spectacularly well. So you can see the percentages here. Let's go over to, we'll just take a look at Control D because they're a lot like Next DNS where you can customize stuff. Then we'll take a look at DNS 0 and they're pretty similar to Quad 9 and we'll start wrapping this up. So with Control D, so you can either use it for like personal use and you can just come on here and they have like it'll give you features and you can do like free DNS, so you can come on here and just grab whatever it is that you want to use. You could select it, or what you can do is make an account and it will let you set all of this stuff up and customize your list. So if you come up here to features, for example, and click on web filtering, it'll bring you over here and it'll talk about, okay, here's some different things that you can block. Ads and trackers, adult content, clickbait, crypto, dating, etc., etc. And it's a nice user interface. like this and Next DNS, it's really easy to go in here and customize all of your different block lists. One thing I'll mention, so they talk about blocking ads. Pretty much all the DNS providers try to block at least some ads by default. Here's what I've noticed. It's not going to be a replacement for uBlock Origin. It's a good idea to just go ahead and run that by itself as well on your browsers. Or if you're using Brave, that's basically does the same thing. Because like if you go to YouTube, for example, or there'll be certain ads like Facebook ads sometimes, or trackers. So for example, the Facebook tracking pixel, sometimes you'll notice things will make it through these ads, these ad and tracker blocking lists. uBlock Origin does a much better job of keeping this stuff blocked. So if you're fine with making an account, you can come over to a service like this and set all this stuff up. So the thing with Control D that I will add real quick, these guys are really going all in on the business aspect, which is smart. It allows them to really find a way to monetize the service. And then they, like I said, they've also got their personal up here. So feel free to do whatever it is that you want. So like you could spend just a couple bucks a month. A few bucks a month will get you access to a whole lot of extra stuff. You don't really need it though. Like you can just use Quad 9 and DNS 0. So let's go over to DNS 0. If you're in Europe, this service works great. If you're in other parts of the world, it would be better to take a look at one of the other providers. Because let's say you're in the US or Canada or Australia and you set up and you're having to have all your DNS resolved through the European Union, you're going to add latency. Like it's not going to be significant, but it will add just enough that it could be annoying for some people where they'll just notice it. So when you go to DNS 0, and by the way, so these guys are pretty similar to Quad 9. There's no account here. This stuff is just plug and play, super easy. And they pretty like all these providers have their own setup options on here. So they'll tell you, how do you set this up on iOS? How do you set this up on Windows? Now they just cover Windows. They don't cover how you would like set it up through Yoga DNS, for example. If you wanted to do that instead, it's up to you. Feel free to use whatever it is that you want. Browsers work great. If you just want to block through your browser, that's fine. If you want to do it through, I would recommend doing it through, like if you're running Windows or Linux, it's easy to just run it through your entire operating system and you get all that extra protection. So I guess my outlook is it doesn't really make much sense to not do it, but to each their own. Now, DNS 0 in particular has this service. So you can do this with like Control D and Next DNS because you can customize your block lists. These guys have an option, so they have their regular protection here. And you can see when you go back to this list here, it shows that you can do, like it only blocked an extra 67 extra malicious domains switching between these two. What these guys do, if you go to 0, it blocks a little bit extra. If you come down here, so it has like newly registered domains, for example, which aren't really going to be an issue for most people, but a lot of bad actors will do this. They'll register a bad domain, or they'll register something that they can abuse. They'll try to use it to spread malware, whether it's through an email campaign like spam emails, or leaving a bunch of leaks on other websites through, maybe they do like malvertising campaigns to get people to click over to this website, or they just find a way to get it listed in search results and get people to click over to the website. And so it's not necessarily a bad idea to just go ahead and block garbage like this. Of course, there can be times where there's people that are using it for legitimate reasons, but it's up to you if you want to block all this different stuff that comes with the 0 option of DNS 0. One thing that's good is typo squatting. This is something that saved me from potentially getting malware last year. I was trying to go to Twitter and I typed in, I think it was TWIITER instead of like Twitter. And I didn't notice it because I was just kind of mashing stuff. And I noticed the connection got blocked. And when I looked up at the address bar up in top, I noticed, oh shit, I spelled it wrong. So what these typo squatters will do is, so like they give the example of Google here where they add an extra O. What they bank on is that people are not going to notice that they put that in the address bar. The connection will go ahead and finish, and then they're on a malicious website, but they don't know it. So then they log into, let's say, a bank account or a social media account, except that you're not actually logging into it. You just sent your login details over to the bad actor who's waiting for them, and then they take over your accounts. So protection against typo squatting. I mean, this could be good, especially if you're typing stuff up into the address bar a lot. Might be a good idea to just go ahead and do that. It's not going to protect you against like everything, but against like common domains. So Google, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff, it'd work. Now let's go ahead and wrap up on this. This is a bonus of we're moving off of how to protect against malware. And this is just something to help out the people that are on the channel. So I talked a little bit about threat intelligence providers, and a lot of people that watch my channel want to get into IT. And there's a million different paths that you can take out there. And if you were wondering, okay, well, you're talking about threat intelligence a whole bunch. What the hell is this? If you've never heard of it, it is a career option within IT. It's specifically within cybersecurity or InfoSec. If it's something you're interested in, I will link these resources down below. You could go read them on your own time, because if you read between these three resources, you would pretty much be able to find out anything you'd want to about the career field, and maybe it's something that would be good for you. So when I talked about threat intelligence, so on the small level where I was talking about how you can just have these lists that get distributed on places like GitHub, when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, you have teams of people that work in they're called like threat intelligence analysts. And what they do is they will look at like advanced persistent threat groups, or APTs. So typically these are nation state hackers. And they will look at, okay, what systems are they infecting? What are their commonly, like how do they typically do this stuff? Who are the people that work in these organizations? There's a lot of research. There's a lot of report writing. There's a lot of presenting your findings to both IT and to like business executive type people. If this is a career path you're interested in, like I said, I'll drop links to all these down below. So Katie Nichols would be the first one. She's got a 3-part series. So you'd want to start with this one and then go through this one and then this one. So she's got a series of like how you would get started. And then there's Shinigami here, who has his own write-up on how to get and do CTI work. And then there is this article here from Andy, who it's this dude right here, and he was talking about how he got into CTI and what the job entails. If it's something you're interested in, you could go read these resources, and if you just want some interesting reading, you could go do that as well, and you could kind of see how I mean, you're not going to get the whole enchilada. A lot of what they do doesn't get revealed to the public, but you could get a pretty good idea of how it is that these guys operate and the type of stuff they do in their job and what it is that they look for. So that might be something that's interesting for some of the people that are watching this video. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. There's a lot of information. I'm going to be breaking down a few other components of that Windows hardening guide to explain stuff in more depth. If there's any questions you have on anything, feel free to drop them down below. And with all that being said, I will see you in the next one.